out to his mama, right? I mean, a grown man. And there were so many people who were just standing by and watching it happen. And I think the thing that really I struggle with is that in the age of technology and folks wanting to be involved, but yet not wanting to be involved and standing at a distance and just being spectators. This life is not a spectator sport, right? It's we have to be involved, we have to be engaged, we have to look out for each other, and just the inhumanity of that whole situation of the whole 8 minutes and 46 seconds was infuriating.
Thank you for sharing that. So I just want to make a statement for attendees that are maybe watching and for our panelists. I'm not sure what happened. It's technology. So the stream went down on Facebook, but now it's back up. So if you can maybe share as you're listening intently. So I want to ask Ms. Zephyr, you teach in Prince George's County, which happens to be one of the most affluent African-American counties in the country. And this happens during the time where you're still teaching these students online due to the COVID virus. What were the reactions of the students, and how did you respond to the moment as a teacher? What did you feel like your responsibility was, and how did you navigate that space?
So we were in the throes of distance learning during that time, and what I basically provided for my students was, this is the time frame which we're going to cover music related topics, and here are 2 times throughout the week where I'm available to listen. And if you have concerns, fears, frustrations, I'm here to listen, because I can't 100% identify with what you're going through, but maybe you can help me understand. And just to echo what Carol said, I mean, my initial reaction was rage, was how is this remotely justified to just another human being, period. But knowing that a lot of my students look like George Floyd, for them, this has to be a very different fear that they live with every day, that we can't completely understand, but knowing that they have somebody that understands that they are afraid and they have a place to voice their concerns, and they have someone that cares about them as an individual. I sent a letter to all of my students at the end of the year and just said, there is a place in this program for all of you as individuals, and collectively as a group, we should embody what the United States should be. And we come together no matter what we look like, no matter which God we pray to, and we make something beautiful together. And that's what we should be doing. And if there's something that concerns you about the way things are happening, we can talk about it. And I have about 200 kids in my program total. At least twice a week, I would have 30 to 35 kids in a Zoom meeting like this, just saying, I'm scared. I don't know what to do. I feel like this could happen to me. What am I supposed to do? And it was a really honest and frank conversation. And I didn't have a lot of answers for them, but just knowing that they had somebody to support them outside of their family structure was important for them to know.
Your students are lucky to have you to be able to support them through that time. And though you may not be able to identify with the students from a cultural perspective, from an empathetic perspective, you were able to reach and share in that moment. One of the comments that's here in the Zoom chat from Robin Spruce, it's more of kind of a commentary. She says, hearing a resounding theme in all of this that resonates with what research has demonstrated, people build empathy through narrative and experience. And I think that's very, very true. However, there is this element that kind of leads into the next question that I have, is that in my experience, and you all have that, but do you find that when you talk about these topics of race and race injustice, do you run into people who don't believe that this is true, that like the experience that the black people or any sort of oppressed culture, that it's just not real? It's termed white disbelief. It's just this space of lack of authenticity given to blacks and people of color or people who are oppressed in response to their cries of racial injustice. I saw a bunch of heads go up and down. Carol, can you maybe share your experience with that? It just is maybe it's either it's personal or maybe it's that of your husband, where people just don't get it. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, this is a pretty personal one for me. And admittedly, it's hard to face when you're talking about folks within your own family who just don't get it, right? So I have two sisters who are older than I am, both married to white men. I'm married to a beautiful Black man from Macon, Georgia, and it's interesting having these conversations because they honestly don't understand the hype behind the whole Black Lives Matter movement. There's no discussion about it. They keep saying, like, what is the big deal? It doesn't impact us. So why are you so concerned about it? And it's really challenging because you try to explain to them, even through the context of my husband, he'll be 65 years old in November, and he grew up in Macon, Georgia, right? So he experienced from a very young age all of this racism. But my sisters, who are fully Chinese, like I am, who grew up in the same community that I did, truly just don't understand it. And I think a lot of it is because we were taught from a young age to do the best that we could to assimilate, right? And so, hate to use the term, but my sisters are somewhat whitewashed, right? And so they don't recognize that there's necessarily this issue of race and racism.
Well, that's very, very interesting and powerful. We'll get to maybe if you, at some point in our questions, like how do you navigate that space and what are those conversations like? If you've tried to maybe educate, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But Reverend Hebb, I think I want to ask you the same question. And uniquely, I just want to share that Reverend Hebb, and maybe you can work this in with your answer, the branch of Presbyterianism that First Presbyterian of Potsdam has covenanted with is very connected and very passionate about inclusivity and really being very forward with renouncing injustice, regardless if it's with race or whether it's sex or sexuality. I'll just share this quick anecdote for the people who are watching. I remember the first time I attended First Presbyterian, I was invited by a colleague at the Crane School of Music, and the opening hymn was Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is the Negro National Anthem, which I was completely floored at that because it was the first time that I had been in a space and been the minority singing my anthem. Which I knew the words, all three verses, and I'm like singing in parts, and the Crane folks are around, and they're like, "Oh, you really know this?" Like, yes, like I could sing this in my sleep. So, can you maybe tie this question together with like your church mission, and even from the perspective of Christianity, and with your experience?
Sure. So I belong to the Presbyterian Church USA, which is a distinct denomination within Christianity. And within the PCUSA Church, I should just acknowledge there's a really large breadth of theological belief. So at one end, you have churches like mine that are really progressive and socially justice minded. But also, there are other PCUSA churches that are very conservative theologically. And the PCUSA church is predominantly white. And this is an interesting question, actually, Dr. Lake, because there's tension that lives within within our church, either church with a big C or a little c.
Mm.
So on the one hand, our denomination is very outspoken about social justice issues. They're quick to jump on the Black Lives Matter bandwagon, and there's all kinds of stuff going on in our denomination. But that doesn't necessarily mean it lines up with the average congregant sitting in the pews. And white Christians are woefully disengaged and uneducated about racism, just the way any other white person in America is. And it's hard because just because the language coming from the denomination might be open and inclusive, it doesn't necessarily translate down to every individual church. And again, when you live in white space, you don't have the experiences to realize what's really going on in our streets and in our country. So I think a lot of times it comes, at least to start with white people who are too afraid to step out of their white bubble. Education is a really big, important tool that white people who look like me need to step in and fill in those spaces, both to normalize the conversation, to say, you know what, it's actually, we're safe to talk about race. And it's important to our faith, it's relevant. I think in terms of church, we also have to make that connection between what's happening on the streets and what's happening in our faith. And, you know, for Christianity, it would be in our scriptures. And help people to see that there is actually an interconnection there. So we have a lot to do at church in terms of creating the gospel, actually, and bringing it to life in America.
Reverend Hebb, that's such a profound just way that you answered that. And it's so interesting that, especially when I sat at First Presbyterian of Potsdam, hearing such powerful statements against racism and it mirroring what I experienced being a Christian in my Black Methodist church, and hearing how that then becomes a similar and very parallel experience that I just did not expect in that space. So that's really, really interesting. And so I also want to just again remind those folks that are here in Zoom and also on Facebook that we are taking your questions to kind of guide our conversation with the panel here. So our next question, and this is going to be interesting. This might, if you're comfortable answering, what's one privilege that you never want to give up? Ms. Staley?
That's a long list to go through, and I don't mean that to be funny. That's a very long list to go through, but I think the one that is most prevalent to me, because I drive so often, is, even though nobody likes being pulled over by the police, I don't ever fear for my life when the sirens go off. I might fear for my bank account. And part of it is, you know, depending on who I have in my car, if we can be honest, you know, I might get pulled over more depending on who I have in my car. But I don't ever have to, it never goes through my head that I have to talk about or think about like putting my hand on the dash and waiting for them to get to the window and asking to be able to reach out and to get something and that kind of thing. And while I don't like that privilege exists, that's probably the one that affects me on a more daily basis.
Oh, that's really, really, really interesting that you bring that up. Anybody else want to offer an answer? Mr. Mariano?
Kind of piggyback off Ms. Staley. Last week, listening to Mayor Hollingsworth, it's never been, you know, the talk she mentioned, and and they watched Blackish. We watched that clip, and then when the mayor was super brave, when she not only discussed having to have a discussion with one of her son's teachers, but how she the emotions that go through, and not just also with you, JR, and when you're saying farewell to your parents, I've never realized ever that it was that potent, that pertinent, that across the board for everybody. I guess that's something that I've always kind of taken for granted. It's beyond like policing. It's the culture that I just it floors me. It pains me to think about how scary it is, because I didn't think it was that scary. I mean, you know, a lot of people voted for President Obama or thought it was one thing, and then and I'm not sure what to really say beyond. I'm floored by that is something that it seems like to me as I'm learning, because I'll be the first one to tell you how naive I am, probably more than everybody else on this panel. Just how that's everywhere, and how almost every single person that I've been speaking to about this or listening to, they share that. That's one of those things that kind of bonds them, and it just floors me.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's very true. And I'll just speak that part of the reason why I think the Black community is such a tight-knit community is that we understand each other's hurt and impression immediately. And I think that's a human thing, and that's very natural. And that's how that happens. I would just want to maybe continue to talk about reflecting on aha moments from part one of the series from our panel. Are there any, what's still resonating with you? Were there any aha moments? Were there any revelation moments? Were there any moments where you're just like, I get this and I didn't get it before, or maybe I still don't understand it? Let's maybe unpack maybe what you're feeling in response to the discussion thus far, even before this panel. And Wendy, yeah.
So I have a lot of thoughts on everything that's said so far, as well as the previous discussions. I think that going back to every video that I watch, every discussion that I have, it's coming from a place of safety and imagining one of my loved ones being the person that's being the victim. And it's opened up a lot of conversations, even just between my husband and myself, finding out things that happened to him growing up that I didn't know about because we never had a reason to really talk about it before. And then trying to figure out with our kids, like, how do you balance having the conversations to keep them safe, but keep them innocent and having a childhood? And so we're trying to figure out, this path. When do we tell them more? And I still have not watched the video. I can't watch the video. I've seen parts of it, but honestly, everything that I see and hear, it's giving me nightmares. And so I can't bring myself to that. And maybe that's my privilege also. But I think that it took me back, because when we finally decided, we had a discussion, what are we going to say to the boys? How do we say at least this much to give them some information, keep them safe? But, maybe we're going to have a driver in a few years. He definitely needs to know some of these things. How do you react when the police pull you over because it's not the same? We live in this buoy bubble, I always call it, that it's like, it's so diverse and everybody loves everybody and it's open to everything. And so we haven't had to really deal with it, although we are very active. We try to travel, when we're not in quarantine. And so we do have to be careful of things. My family out in the Midwest, I was like, okay, we're going to go travel out there. What do we need to think about? I've never thought about these things before. So do we need to be careful? Do we need to have more conversations? A lot of my family are Republican, Trump supporters, all of those types of things. And maybe I don't have many conversations. I was thinking, okay, in the past, these were many opportunities where things were said, I should have said something, and I just wasn't ready to have that conversation or take that on. But now I am, and I think that we all need to be a little bit more, but we also have to meet people where they are, because knowing how naive I was, I didn't realize all of this was going on. I didn't realize all of the injustices, or, I guess in my mind, even just to be completely honest, when Black Lives Matter started, you know, I have my family. Of course, I want them to have to matter and to be important. But even in my white mind, I'm thinking, well, all lives matter. Yeah, of course they do. But then I'm like, oh, you can't say that. And I had to have this conversation with other family members recently. It's like, they just don't get it. They just don't know. They haven't had the experiences. They don't realize, you know, that the same privileges or the same opportunities aren't out there. It really was in my mind growing up. I'm thinking, well, why didn't they try harder? Why didn't they work harder or do this or that or the other? Didn't they have the same options as I did? No, I didn't realize that. And we have to remember that a lot of people don't realize that. And when they're saying something, as much as we want them to get it right now, and it seems so obvious, we have to meet people where they are and bring them to, even though we're not saying, you know, we're saying a lot of people have to educate themselves, but they don't know what they don't know. That's the problem. And I really think that a lot of us have to have those bold conversations to help them understand better.
Well, that's a lot. Like, and there's a bunch of amens going on as well. So David, you raised your hand, and then Madeline will come to you, and then Nancy.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think, to me, after watching the last 2 weeks, I think there's so much that white people are blissfully unaware of. And that's kind of the way I've tried to think about it, because for so many of us, we haven't had these experiences, and the way our lives are not impacted the way the Black community's lives are. And I think that was just such a profound, tragic takeaway for me, because I have 2 beautiful daughters, wonderful wife, great family, and I have a million things I worry about every day. And I can't imagine worrying about just going to the store and what happens if I get pulled over by the wrong police officer. I can't imagine being, having this disadvantage in life from the get-go that just is so profoundly impactful, and having all this additional worry on top of everything else that's going on in life. And I just can't, you just can't fathom it. And I, honest to God, just wanted to reach through the computer screen and give all of you a hug, because it's just like, I'm sorry, and that's something that I think I keep coming back to, is I feel, like I should have been doing more earlier, and I've talked to a lot of people about that. And I think that kind of like white guilt is something I've experienced a lot recently. And the other thing that's really stuck out to me is the amount of history that I did not know about our own country, and what is not taught in our schools, and what we need to do to make sure that information is taught, because there are too many people that I have dealt with who, going back to a few questions ago, don't want to accept that the stories you, JR, and the rest of the Black community are sharing are true. Because it's like if they admit it to themselves that there's true, then they're admitting there's a problem, that they have to do something about it. And there's certain folks who I think can change, and there are other folks who we're never going to change. And I really think we need to make sure we're doing everything we can as early as we can to make sure everyone is well educated on this.
Yeah, thank you. Madeline, if you want to share.
So going back to privilege, I wanted to get out of the house. I just needed to get out of the house. We've been in the house forever. And I just drove, and I kept driving, and then I came down the coastline, and I found this one little area that had this little bluff that I could look over and see the ocean. And there were 4 sheriffs there that were reprimanding people walking on the bluffs. And I just parked my car and sat on the bluff. And I thought to myself, if I was a different colored skin, I have a feeling they would have probably asked me what I was doing there, why I was there. And I just sat there, and I had a total epiphany about being able to not be questioned about why I'm somewhere. I too, Wendy, was All Lives Matter, but it just simply came from a lack of education. Once somebody told me what the Black Lives Movement was, it just blew the whole top open for me. And it blew a lot of, like, I had a lot of conversations with my husband. They're still pretty spicy right now. I have a lot of conversations with my parents. Coming from it's third generation concentration camp victim family, they have this idea of just protecting their children. They don't want anything to happen from them to them, and that's kind of where most of my childhood and my adult life kind of stemmed from. So I agree. Black Lives Matter movement is like you said, David, I had no idea the history, and I wasn't curious, and I didn't have any reason to be curious. And now I'm curious, and I'm thirsty, and I'm up all night looking and reading and just trying to be in the other shoes, listening. I want to apologize, but I think my actions are going to be more important than my apology.
Well, that's really powerful, Madeline, and thank you for sharing that vulnerable just aspect of your just coming into awareness. And you and I talked privately, just starting at ground zero and being like, hey, there's a change, but I am actively working to educate myself so that, and you're influencing other people as you're learning. And that's just really, really powerful. Nancy, your thoughts? I'm sorry, go ahead, Madeline.
No, that's okay. It's kind of a mourning process where I'm going through different emotions. And right now I'm at the pissed. I'm pissed off. I really am. So
I tell you, there's so many similar emotions on all sides of this with grief that we all understand, that like it's almost like that we're grieving our own existence, even being alive before us, and where we fall in the time continuum and beyond. Nancy, your thoughts?
So at first, the thought was to not watch the video, right? That's the bliss that we're talking about, is if we don't watch it, we can still say that we grieve, we can, feel bad. But until you sit through it, sit in your discomfort and everything else that you may feel, I don't feel like we can take a proper step forward in figuring out how we can do whatever we can to make it better is not the phrase I want, to make a difference, right? And so I had to force myself to sit through and watch the entire thing, and to cry and to throw stuff, and I hope my pastor's not watching, and to curse, so that you can start to understand, why African Americans feel the way that they feel. Again, it's recognizing that I will never be able to truly understand that, but and everybody needs to sit through, that is not in the African American community, needs to sit through that video and feel that discomfort and feel the pain and sit through it, and then figure out what steps we can take forward to, understanding things better and figuring out how we can make and do our part.
Nancy, you're right. It's watching it makes it real, and even as a Black man, I knew that I was going to watch something that was going to piss me off. But I needed to watch it in order to empathize and take that in and to experience it, in order to allow those emotions to fuel what I was going to do in response.
Exactly.
Just hearing about it wasn't good enough. I'm thinking about the movie Passions of the Christ, which is, chronicles the last week of Christ's walk on earth. And I've seen that movie once. I don't need to watch it again. I don't want to see, around Easter time, I move past the commercials. I do not need to see that movie ever again, because it was so real to me, and I saw it. The cinematography was so powerful. to experience. I mean, I've seen, I've been, everyone's done the Easter plays where you read the thing, when you're a child growing up in the church, and it's very flowery and whatever. But when you see that in such gory detail, it becomes real. And I think that's one thing that we have to do to understand, like, it's no longer something we hear about, and it's no longer something that textbooks are where we get this information. Because of everyone having a smartphone, we are seeing this happen face to face. And so here goes my question, Reverend Hebb, help me out. So if people can understand, and people can, Christianity is founded upon this gory experience, right? How is it that people can't make the connections in the truth of the Passion story and the truth of people dying in the streets? What's the disconnect? And how do you, as a pastor in this space, how do you make it real? How do you make it relevant? And how do you connect these dots that I've heard you do personally, from being in the congregation? Like, what's behind it? How do you do that?
I think the disconnect has a lot to do with not wanting to understand the connection. I think it was James Baldwin that said something about underneath white people's hate is pain. And if we open ourselves to really acknowledging what our country was founded on and what it still perpetuates, we have to sit with a reality of who we are and where we come from that doesn't match our sense of self-identity. And I think most people, you want to feel good about yourself, right? You want to think, I'm a good person, and I'm a follower of Jesus. So of course I'm good and loving. I think what it really comes down to is most people don't want to do the hard work. We're comfortable living in a world of lies and untruths. And I guess, Madeline, I'm really impressed with, I'm thirsty to know more. And I'm so thankful to hear that. I think there are some of us out there, us being white people in America, who feel that way, but for the most part, people are terrified of change, and they're terrified of really looking at the mirror and seeing who they are in the context of what we are. Mm-hmm. How to go about doing this? In all honesty, I have no idea. I am making this up as I go along. I mean, I have my whole, my arsenal of books, that I read. And also, I think it's really, really important that white people have connections to people who don't look like you. And who don't live in the same culture, because if you just live in your little white bubble, it is so insular. You can only hear your own self think, right? And so if you can't have those experiences yourself, to be able to listen to stories. I remember, so I went to Colgate Rochester Crozer Divinity School, which shout out to all those CRCDS folks. Which is where Martin Luther King Jr. graduated from seminary, from Crozer Divinity School. And CRCDS has the only Black church studies program in the country. So there are a number of Black folk, mostly Black men, some Black women, who come to the school. And it was this mashup of progressive white folks like me and Black church folks, both progressive and theologically conservative also, which is, you would want to think that everyone would just line up really well, but they don't. And I remember a friend of a colleague, I'll call him a colleague. He said to me once, I'm not willing to count you as a friend until I know I can trust you. As a white person, he's speaking. He's a Black man. And he said, you haven't done anything yet to earn my trust. And so to me, you are still a colleague. And we were talking one day, and he worked, so when he was in school, he worked at the front desk of the ritziest hotel in Rochester. And one night, a white teenage boy and his father came in for this young man to go have some sort of tryout at Eastman School of Music with his cello. And the dad asked, listen, my son really needs a place to practice. Is there anywhere in the building that he can go for a couple hours and play his cello? And my colleague went out of his way to find a space. He really wasn't supposed to let this kid use the ballroom, but he said, there's no one in here for the next couple hours. It's all yours, go for it. And so the kid went out and played, and then he and his dad were supposed to go eat dinner. And it was a cold winter night, and the kid went to drive up to bring the car around to the front of the building. And my colleague went out on a break, and he needed to go get something into his car. And inside, he has on his white shirt and tie and suit coat. But he took his suit coat off to run out, and he threw his hoodie on over because it was snowing or something. So, he pulls his hoodie up and he runs out to his car to come get something. And the kid is sitting in the right by the front door, the front entrance of the hotel. And as my colleague is walking up behind him to re-enter the building in his hoodie, he hears the door lock on the car. And when this colleague of mine was telling me the story, the pain that he felt in the wound that created in him, it was just devastating. And I will never have experiences like that ever in my life. And if you don't live in proximity, not just physical proximity, but emotional and psychological proximity to people who have those kind of experiences that poke holes in the bubble that you live in, you're never going to have to confront yourself, right? Yeah.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. I'm going to just do some housekeeping things here. If Reverend Hebb, there's a question in our Q&A that I think you'll be able to find. It's in the answered section. It deals specifically with someone who's asking how to help the conversations. They're specifically in a Presbyterian church space. So I think you'll be able to really answer that one. If you can type in and add that in there for us. Just a couple of comments just to share from folks that are watching. The Facebook feed, of course, runs a little bit slower than the Zoom feed. So some of these comments are old, but I do want to put it out here in this space. One comment comes for Wendy and your story, talking about your boys and wanting to keep them so that naive and that excitement and like, no, we don't want to crush, Santa Claus is real. Like, yes. But there's a comment, at least dealing with this idea of race. The person suggests instead of protecting their childhood, think of protecting their lives. And it actually becomes a continual conversation that you will have, but at least it's like you're starting this foundation that you can build upon that. And it's challenging. I can only imagine, even I don't know how, the conversations, I don't have children, but especially in your case, it's like, oh my gosh, when do we let our children know? Like my mom did, it was like, JR, the world works differently. You must sprint when others run, and it's because of your skin color. It doesn't mean that you're less than, but you are going to have to work twice as hard to get equally as far as your peers. And it was just like, okay, and go. But I know it's not that easy. And as a mother's heart, you don't want to crush with the whims of the world. It's almost like the other talk is what we'll talk about. That it's like, when do you have that one? That one's also very uncomfortable and very weird. This is another one of those talks, specifically when you're raising Black children, that I think still fits in that space of, when do I have it? Wendy, go ahead.
Can I just say, I just want to say,
Yeah.
we have a lot of discussions about different things that are difficult, and we've never put it in terms of race, though. I think
Okay,
that
cool.
we've always said, you work hard at school to get good grades, to get a good job, to get good money so you can support a good family, to set the ideals high. We've also discussed with them, like, a lot of times they get in trouble based on who they're hanging out with, or it could be very minor things at this point, but we then can start the conversation. You have to be very careful about who you choose as your friends and what you do with them, because even if you're being good, if you're around them or you're known to be associating with them, you could still be held responsible. So not putting it in terms of race, but still making sure that they understand how they're going to be held accountable based on who they're interacting with.
Right, Wendy, and that's a good suggestion for anyone who's listening, who's specifically like in that space of like, how do we in essence warm up to that talk, and then you're putting those good things, and those are good things for children, period. But I know, knowing in the back of your mind, you're thinking more like a cumulative conversation of things over time. So that's really awesome that you add that. Madeline, I've got a question for you.
Yes.
What could you, or what would you, if you had the opportunity with your kind of awakening about this, what would you, if you could, tell your previous awakened self to help the process to have occurred maybe sooner in your life?
That's a great question. I was so sheltered for so long. And I just needed, and I love my parents, but I needed a little bit more stimulation when it comes to news and what's happening in the world. It wasn't topic of conversation. My mom, I love her, but she doesn't really want to talk about news. She actually said to me, I just don't want to deal with this. I just want to go back to my own reality. And I said, Mom, this is your reality, and she said, well, yeah, you're right. And that's where the privilege comes in, where I had an idea, an epiphany that, oh my gosh, every single day you walk and you have a certain skin color on, and people are judging you every single day, versus me, I don't think twice about it, and I want now, this is broken a cycle. And now I have a daughter who's 9.5. And now she knows everything. She knows about, Elijah from last year. She knows about George Floyd. She knows about different skin color. And from the first panel, I know that the first panel was concerned that the momentum's going to stop. They're like, yeah, everybody's on board. Black Lives Matter. I have a sign up in my yard, but is it going to continue? And that's where I sit and I think, and I'm like, how is this going to continue when we are so far in and so stuck, and we have white people yelling at white people about racism? I am part of a face group. We have this face group, kind of like a diversity and inclusivity place in our neighborhood. And we have white people yelling at white people about racism. And that's not our anger. That's not our anger. Our anger, we need to redirect and we need to educate. And yes, our country is young. I get it. I have hope, but it's more just talking and having these uncomfortable conversations.
Well, thank you for answering that with such a unique perspective. And I hear what you're doing. And if I could maybe fill in, since you can't go back and talk to your previous self, you can, however, talk to your children. And that's what's so powerful in what you're saying, is that that's where you can maybe right the wrongs even within yourself and your own sheltered kind of space. I think that's really, really powerful. Madeline. Just to share a comment, I think this kind of goes to what Dave was talking about, just being unaware of the pervasive stress that the Black community or people who are oppressed experienced day in, day out, 24/7. Lori Batts just made the comment that Lori Batts happens to be one of my 7th grade science teacher, actually. She's a white woman, and she was married to a Black man and has mixed children as well. So she's been sending amens to the panel the entire time. But she just makes the comment that part of the reason that, especially dealing with COVID now, like everyone's concerned about everyone, right? We're all concerned about our health, but we also know that this disease, at least until we have a vaccine of sorts, attacks the Black community in a genetic way that's completely different than other races in our country. And we wonder, like, well, what is the reason why? Why is the virus picking on Black people? Well, part of it is, we know it's health, high blood pressure, diabetes, etc. That's very prevalent. But I think we also know that the general stress of, even if it's subconscious, plays into this as well in a very profound and very powerful way. So that's just a comment that is connecting there. Carol, did you have a comment? I think I saw that you were unmuted for 2 seconds. No?
No, I'm good.
Okay,
Thank you.
Good. Okay, good. This is a question for Kevin Mariano. Here's the history question someone has come up with. I'm going to frame this to you as far as, teaching. For the African American community, or the Black community, whichever we would term that demographic, we learn about white history. I remember taking European history. I remember taking, we did Europe. We did some Asian history. I learned about everybody else except for my culture, and it was an American history. I think slavery lasted a day. It's kind of like how the dinosaurs exist and they're gone in earth science class in like a day, like just here and gone, and we move on. Why do you think that is? What about the curriculum? Why is it that way?
It's been explained to me, maybe by some coworkers, that what happened in Africa isn't that important, to be blunt. And I attack it from a different way. I live in an area where Trump beat Clinton, and I have a lot of just to give you like an idea, the town of 169 districts in the state of Connecticut, Plainfield ranks 158th as far as affluence. It's very rural. It's very rural. And the kids, they're good kids. Education's tough though. It's not as valued all the time, for sure. During distance learning, when I have some classes, all 29 kids will log in and I'll do that thing. Sometimes I have classes of kids, like lower level classes where kids struggle. And I was lucky out of a smaller class of 12. If I got one or two, usually it was about one kid and one paraprofessional that would tune in. Even if I called the parents, called the school, whatever. Education is not always valued as much as I would hope. Why is it like that? What I can tell you though is that in my district, I teach 10th graders and I teach 11th graders. And I'll try to keep it brief for Zach and everybody else. I heard you. My first unit, I'm supposed to teach like the lead up to World War I. So any history teachers out there, I think Miss Ayers is out there. Mrs. Ayers. So we learn about nationalism, imperialism, the alliance system, and militarism, the four main causes of World War I. That's something that people agree to. And one of the things that I really start off with is cultural anthropology. We learn, there's an article that I read when I was an undergraduate by professor at University of Vermont. His name is William Haviland. And the general structure, it basically says, in a nutshell, that all humans, no matter how white you may look, all humans appear to have a black ancestry. And it goes through why we have different skin colors. And this is the first article I read with my 10th graders at all levels. And I also bring it back, and I think one of my juniors, or a young lady, former student who's on right now, she'll attest that she had to read it in 10th grade and 11th grade because I think it's so powerful. It discusses why there's different skin colors, and it comes down to things like transparency, the amount of keratin that's in the skin, the reflected color of the blood vessels, the melanin amount, the vitamin D. I literally walk up to students to get them exposed to this. I put my arm out and I'll say, am I blacker than you? And I don't know if this was appropriate, but in the sacred space, once I've kind of won them over, I'm very transparent in the classroom. I'll say, am I blacker than you? Or am I blacker than you? Or, and I say, flip your hand over and your arm over, and you see that it's lighter there. So what is this? And the general consensus of, Ashley Montague and all these other anthropologists over years, they're trying to rewrite the wrongs. And it's been going on since a guy named like Johann Blumenbach back in Germany in the 1500s, and how he's studying skulls. And, the rounder the skull, the more like God is, and the more, in the appearance of God. And how that was basically like, it made the dominant society think, hey, we're doing pretty good. And so that's like, they find these skulls in the Caucasus Mountains, hence the word Caucasian, where it came from. And, just to open kids' minds up to, I really, really focus on my bias. I know I'm supposed to be a social studies teacher in the middle, and it's been difficult. I'll attest, it's been very difficult, especially over the last couple of years, to kind of stay in the middle on a lot of issues. I tried really my best. I feel that too. But to get kids to open their minds up and to say, like, we have a lot more in common than we have different. And I think that that's one of the main things. When I discuss nationalism, our first subunit is Toussaint Louverture in Haiti. And we do Father Miguel Hidalgo, and then I do a whole unit on imperialism of Africa, and we learn about Libya and Ethiopia remaining one of the last independent countries, and how the Italians attacked in the late 1890s. But then when it was a fair fight, the Battle of Adwa, then King Menelik II, they fought against the Italians and pushed them back, and Mussolini comes back to Ethiopia later for pre-World War II. And so I think that it's really important to explain for U.S. history about, the rubber trade and Henry Ford, but where's all that rubber coming from? That's coming from the Congo. That's coming from Leopold II, and just how brutal it was. I try to get them to just hear it, and I'm never going to know. But just to like get kids exposed to that, I'm like 100% about trying to write curriculum, co-write with whatever, because one of the things that was really, really one of my aha moments was from Dr. Lee the other day. And Dr. Lee said, if someone is not willing to listen, then skip them. And you're not going to win everybody over, and I realize that. But working with the youth and having so much influence and at that stature, you have to, one of the panelists said, use your gifts. And I think that's such an important thing to do. And part of my privilege is that I get to work with a bunch of wonderful kids all the time. And if they're invested and they're listening, it's such an important way to kind of start that conversation. I don't know. That's kind of where it is. I think it comes down to an appreciation. You have to make that as a teacher. You have to make that appreciation. You have to make that commitment to what you're going to do. I've gotten in trouble with parents before for things I've said. One time in class, I said something. Well, when you said slavery, you learned about it for a month, or sorry, for a day. We spend a lot of time on it, but 2 weeks, just on a full day, just on the middle passage. And I made a comment one time and said, Dunkin' Donuts is huge in Northeastern, in Connecticut. And I said, we joke that America runs on Dunkin'. Well, back in the day, America ran on slavery. I got called out by a parent one time, and I got sent to the principal's office. And it's hard as a public school teacher. You got to watch what you say and all that. And I understand that. So there's always this fine line, because I'm passionate about some stuff, but I really have to. I'm also kind of like snared sometimes at the same time. And it's just a matter of just getting the word out. And also, I'm sorry, just one last thing, just to understand from the Black perspective, sorry, Zach, and for the African American perspective, like, I want to know what should be in there when the curriculum is not written by a bunch of white teachers in a very rural town. You know what I mean? Like, there needs to be more of a canon. What is the literature? You know, I want to make sure that, you know, Frederick Douglass's speech, the July 4th speech, is in there. Like, that should be something that every kid in America and elsewhere should study. There's so much that's there, and comparing Du Bois to Booker T. Washington, and comparing that to Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X and stuff. I mean, it's so rich. So.
Absolutely. And Kevin, what's interesting, and I'm glad, but you're bringing all of this richness to the curriculum yourself, correct? There's no textbook that brings all of that African history into it. You're augmenting the curriculum, and I think that's really, really good. And just something just to add, you know, for white culture, you know, the history books, I saw immediately, you know, kings and queens and you know, people with stature and influence and power. But for me, I remember the first time I saw Black people in a textbook, we were slaves. And that's where it starts. And so that's letting us know how that changes. Ms. Zephyr, connecting this to curriculum and the world of music, okay? I've been a musician since I was the age of 2. And if I were to take out my gospel experience and that I learned from the Black churches that I was raised up in, I would say that the first time that I performed a piece within that you would be considered classical cultural music from the Western cloth or just in a traditional academic setting would probably be when I conducted on my first college job, Omar Thomas's Of Our New Day Begun. So we're thinking, I'm what? Lord, I guess I'm in my 30s and I started playing, you know, music when I was 2. What are you doing with your students to do as what Kevin's doing is to go outside of what we would consider, I guess, in music, the canon or the curriculum as it has stood for so long?
So that's a great question, because this has been a topic in the music world for the past couple years now. And it's a difficult topic, just like the one we're speaking about now, because I'm a conservatory trained Western philosophy based musician. I had some experience with jazz in high school and a little bit in college. I played in a mariachi band throughout my beginning years as a high school band director. But I've never delved really deeply into any of those different, I've experienced them, but currently I'm pursuing a master's degree online at University of North Carolina, Greensboro, and I'm taking a class in multicultural issues in music education. And one of our tasks is to implement a unit within our class that teaches an aspect of multiculturalism that we think is relevant to the population that we teach. And I have a lot of students that are directly from African descent. Like during the summer, they and their parents go home to Nigeria or the Congo or Kenya or wherever it may be. And so I have a percussion ensemble class that we've been more focusing on the correct technique and all of the westernized instruments. But this fall, or whenever we return actually back to school, we are going to do a unit on Afro-Cuban, Afro-Peruvian percussion methods. And basically my professor guided me a little bit. I wanted to do a whole unit on, we're going to do African percussion. And that was sort of my experience. It was like, I'm going to have a little bit of this. And she said, I would encourage you to narrow your focus a little bit more and say, we're actually really going to delve deeply into this, because if you're not from the DC area, we have a very indigenous form of music here called go-go that all of my kids are totally into. But all of the rhythms and the basis and the instruments come from Afro-Cuban, African drumming. It's so you can start with something that they know. This is go-go. You're all aware of it. You want to play this music. But it came from here, and they can actually learn something more about their culture and how it has been extrapolated out into other different musical forms. And I think the connection with something they enjoy, they love, they know, but then teaching them, well, this is actually where it came from. These are the simple rhythms, these are the instruments, and then having them create that themselves is going to be a much greater satisfaction than if I taught them about a little bit about many things. So that's our plan for whenever we're able to get back into the school building.
Rachel, that's so awesome. And your students are going to think you're the best teacher ever, because you are seeing who they are in their identity, and you are putting them at the center of the experience of their education. Even though they're coming with background experiences in this, they're going to love teaching you things about this that they understand. And I think that's something that we can apply in so many different areas, that there's so much power in what Rachel and Kevin have both shared in putting, Black and brown and different people in the center of the discussion, so that way they can see themselves reflected in positive lights, that it's worth studying this, and you as a teacher find value in bringing that in the discussion. That's really, really awesome. I'm going to ask a question of Zachary Nimzer. We're going to kind of move ahead in our conversation to kind of touch on this. Zach, you and I have talked for a while about, the role of policing. I think you and I, ever since I was one of the people who actually had to talk about your good qualities and character for you to get your job. And so right now, Zach, the Black community does not trust the police force. We just don't. I can't ever say that we ever really did, but as we are able to watch these images and these videos, it's getting like, I just this week watching the Vigil for Elijah, and you have a bunch of people out there playing violin, in a public space. It's peaceful. No one is looting at all, and we see video of people being pepper sprayed and off of public property. So I guess my question to you is, as you've heard the responses to questions dealing with policing and the judicial system, the prison system from last week, what do you have to say about where we are? How do we begin to fix this? What have you done personally to try to fix this? How can we begin to fix this trust thing? Do we defund the police and blow it up and start over and maybe put more money in education? I'm not trying to, make your salary lower necessarily, but it's like, how do we handle this major problem? Because unfortunately, again, there's laws that are unjust, and those laws then trickle down to enforcement that is also unjust because of those laws. What do we do?
Yeah, that's a really simple answer. That just there are so many layers to this issue. It's and you know that there's not a one size fits all solution. We're not going to get some type of national standards with the current government the way it is. Each side wants to have their own vision of what changes they think needs to be made. One side thinks they should do much less. The other side completely different, and they'll never come to a consensus. So that's not where the change is going to happen. It's going to have to be on the state level. each state needs to examine, you know, the best practices that works nationwide. There are states that are really good at weeding out bad cops and making sure that they don't get jobs at other places. There are states that are terrible at that. There was a news article last week about an officer in New Jersey that was on his 9th police department. I will tell you, in Maryland, that can't happen because there's a statewide training commission that tracks officers that are flagged for specific things like excessive force or integrity issues. Those things need to go nationwide, but that change will only happen on a state by state level. One of the hardest hit I've felt over the past few months, a friend of mine who is Black, who lives in the jurisdiction where I work, has a Black son, and his Black son asked his dad, how old do you have to be for the police to stop you? Because he basically needed to know when he needed to be worried. And that just, I've never been so ashamed of my profession in my life. And this was a child who lives where I work, meaning that the chance of him running into a cop would be one of my cops, somebody that works for me. And he was still afraid. And no matter how much I know the people that work for me are vetted, and I can vouch for them and speak to their character and credibility, there are people that are terrified of them. And that's just a problem. And you know, we don't need to completely blow it up, but a lot of changes need to be made. The lack of funding for mental health treatment in our country is criminal. And if we need to start taking money from police departments to help with mental health treatment, I am completely for it. In the county that I work, I don't work for that specific police department, but they just cut from their budget to mental health facility in the county, because there is no mental health treatment facility in the county. If we come across somebody who's in mental health crisis, we basically take them to the hospital, and they put basically a 72-hour hold on them. And if they are okay after that 72 hours, they're back out on the street. They don't need 72 hours. They need long-term treatment to get well, and they don't get that. And that's another nationwide problem. Our education system is absolutely broken, and in the inner cities, our major metropolitan areas, it's even worse. Baltimore City is a great example of just hundreds of millions of dollars being dumped in there that is woefully mismanaged, and who knows where that money's going. And it's not going to the kids, and it's not going to their educations, and it's frightening. So I could talk about for 5 hours, just on this subject, but we need to do better. The changes that are being made, I will tell you, like the 8 can't wait. I don't know if you've heard of that. Basically, Can
you describe that very quickly for people that are listening?
Yeah. So 8 can't wait are 8 specific things that police departments can change immediately to help improve the way we interact with the public, and not necessarily just Black people, just the public in general. Things like standardizing use of force, report writing. I'm not gonna be able to rattle off all 8 on the top of my head, but the amount of agencies that are actually going through with these things and making these changes, if they're not already doing them, is actually astounding. If you knew how hard it was to change policies and procedures at police departments, especially big ones, and to see these changes happening this quickly, it's unprecedented.
So is that, do you think, I'm sorry, but I just want to connect some pieces. Do you think it's because of the protests and does that really make a difference? Is that why we're seeing the change now?
So it's hard to say what every agency is feeling, but my hope is that a lot of the leadership of these agencies are realizing that there's a problem and we need to make these changes. It's not okay. These protests are going to die down. This will go away. We just have to lay low for a little while and we'll be okay. It's okay, hold on, there are some things we can do better. We need to, weed out the bad cops. Oh, I'm sorry. One of the most important things of the 8 Can't Wait is to demand that officers step in when they see excessive force being used or somebody doing something appropriate, and mandating it. It's something we teach, but it's not in anybody's policies that demand ethical intervention, as we call it. So now it is. And for that officer to not pull that cop off of the helpless person on the ground, they're just as responsible as obviously we're seeing from the George Floyd incident.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, we got to start somewhere, and we've made more progress over the past few weeks and months than has been made in years.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, for all of us, those here on the panel, as well as those of us in our society, we all have got to keep pushing. This is not something that's going to be done today, but literally and this is me kind of getting us maybe to the allyship kind of conversation. Just as I wake up every day realizing that I'm a Black man, we need white people in power to every day realize that this injustice exists, and to make it your business to do something every single day that keeps pushing towards this idea of equality and equity within our society. It literally is a non-stop, this is not going to be cured overnight. This is, it's like we are pushing this huge just stone up a hill, and we just have to be vigilant until one day, as Dr. King would say, that Black children and white children, Jews and Gentiles can join in this rapturous, and I don't know, maybe it'll happen and the rapture will happen and poof, then God's like, I'll take you now. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's that's what the goal is. But I think we do have to be very, very vigilant. And so my statement to the panel is I love each and every one of you, even those of you that I've just met within the last week, but we have to keep working at this together. And it's going to take you using your power and your influence and your access and your privilege and taking that. It's like everyone has to be Robin Hood here, right? Robbing from the rich and giving to the poor. Or I think of Harriet Tubman. She used her privilege of freedom, right, to go back and get other people to give them that same extended gift. And I think that that's where we are as a society. And it's great to see monuments be torn down, but I'm not satisfied by seeing these pictures moved. It's the systemic racism that's behind it that we have to work to eradicate. And so I think it was Dr. Hughes that said, for the white community, yeah, there's hard conversations that are happening in your families, and there's some people who are not going to change. We don't need you to change, your racist uncle. I need you to change your influential, powerful racist uncle. You know what I mean? That's where we have to gain ground. This isn't a game of chess. This isn't a game of checkers. This is a game of chess. This is going to take strategy. This is going to take lots of thinking. We need, people like you all, regardless if you have children or you don't. We need you at the PTSA. We need you on the school board. We need you, running for county offices because you get it. We need more people who get it to get in office. And I think that's how we basically blow this thing up from the inside, with people who truly understand race in our country and understand what our principal goal is for harmony in humanity. So we're close to the end. I just want to give each of you all 30 seconds. Kevin, you have 30 seconds to give your kind of last pitch to, let's say, to the white community, to your peers. What do you want to say in these last 30 seconds that's going to go all across the internet to try to make change happen? Help me throw a small pebble in this ocean of a problem. We'll start with Carol.
Thanks, Dr. Lake. I think what's really important for everybody to remember, and it's almost become cliche at this point, but this is a movement, not a motion, not a moment. So we need to make sure that we continue this momentum, that we have. One of the things that I've really recognized, and sadly this is true, but this is the America that we live in, is that one white voice probably has more power than perhaps 100 or even 1,000 Black voices. And that's why the white community is so important in this conversation and making change, because that's just the state that we live in, unfortunately, such that it is. And so we talk about allyship and we talk about all these different things. I'm a big believer in Black and Asian solidarity. And so just taking a look at what the Asian community can do and what my influence is in that space is really what I'm committed to doing as well. But we have to keep speaking out against injustice.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carol. Wendy, your thoughts?
I want to say to everybody, have those courageous conversations. Don't give up. I think that we have to get over what our beliefs have been, be open to change, be open to listening, hear people's experiences. Don't be okay with just walking away or thinking this isn't going to affect me, because it affects all of us, and everybody deserves opportunities, especially to be safe and live their lives.
Absolutely. Thank you. Nancy, I see you're driving. Please be safe. I'm gonna, oh God, I'm not seeing this. And Zach, close your eyes.
No, I'm not looking at the camera. I do apologize. I tried, my laptop died. I've been sitting in my car, but it died. So 30 seconds quickly. As an ally, I think we need to understand that everybody's mind can be changed depending on how it is approached. As somebody who's not sure if there's an ally, I feel like if we all understand that, even maybe not explicitly, that we are all at some point in time racist to some extent, and understanding that that's just the environment that we may have grown up with the way the media, textbooks, things like that, and understanding, like, with every move that we make, making sure that it doesn't come out to be explicitly racist, and changing our way of thinking as we come and experience being around other people to open our mind. I think that will kind of help reframe our train of thought. Racism is not always explicit, and we need to understand that.
Thank you. Mr. Tucker, your thoughts?
Not unmute myself. Sorry. I don't think this is going to be easy. And I think that's something we have to remember. I think this is going to take time, and we should try to do whatever we can as quickly as possible. But as several other people have said, this is a movement. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And we can't let things fall by the wayside, because we have had opportunities in the past to make profound changes, and we've seen instances in the past where some things have happened, but then we kind of fall back to the way things once were, or we never really addressed things, or we tried something and it didn't work. And there could be things that we try that don't work, but we need to be able to get back off the mat and then try something else and continue to move our society forward to a point where we don't have to have a conversation like this, where our children are living in a country where we can truly talk about everyone being equitable, and we don't have to worry about race. And I think that's really what we need to focus on. We need to focus on the people that are willing to help us do that, not worry about the folks that are just going to drag us down into a mud fight that we don't need to have. And we can't be afraid to make those people mad. And we just have to move on and keep going. And I think that's kind of what my takeaway has been from all this.
Thanks, Dave. Ms. Zephyr.
I think moving forward, we have to be extremely wary. The white population has to be extremely wary of emotional appeasement versus actual action. And I think tearing down monuments and making Black Lives Matter murals, indeed, they're all symbolic in a way, and they make people feel good. But they're another sort of appeasement tactic to say, okay, we want you to, be quiet and do. They actually are not bringing forth any, I shouldn't say any, not the kind of change that is necessary to move Black people forward in any sort of sustainable way in our society. And I think we have to be extremely wary of the emotional appeasement efforts versus actual steps and actions to make that happen.
Thank you. I've forgotten who have I not gone to for their final comments. Can you raise your hand? Okay, I thought so. Oh, yep, I got it right. Wendy. Oh, I already do it. Okay, I did, and then you put, yeah, duh. Zach.
Yeah, so again, I'll try to be brief. First of all, a lot of people talked about educating themselves. If you're in the DC area and you haven't been to the Museum of African American Culture and History, oh my God, it's a crash course, and you need to spend at least 2 days there. And there are obviously museums in every major city, but that one is just unbelievable. So educate. As far as the world of police, continue to put pressure on your elected officials and your police departments where you live, making sure that they are making these changes and they are on board with the movement as well. That's what everybody can do. And all police department emails and elected official emails are always online. Call, email, hold your people accountable.
Thanks, Zach. Reverend Hebb, did I get final comments from you? Okay, Reverend Hebb, thank you.
Yeah, so white people, this is probably some of the hardest work you will ever do in your life, and that's okay. Doing race work asks you to look at parts of yourself that you don't even know exist, who you choose as friends, where you live, the type of food you eat, the songs you sing. For Christians out there, the stories you tell yourself about Jesus, all of these things are influenced by racism in America. And until you really start digging down into the layers, you won't know these things about yourself. As you do so, I'll just say it's scary, okay? But there is a big difference between being unsafe and feeling uncomfortable. When you do race work, you are not unsafe. No one is gonna bust through the door and shoot you with a gun. No one's gonna come stab you. You're gonna feel uncomfortable. And feeling uncomfortable is scary, but it is okay to feel uncomfortable. And we have to get used to that feeling, because people of color live in this uncomfortable space in their hearts all the time. And the only way to move out of racism is for those of us who never feel uncomfortable to take on some of that, the burden of uncomfort, until we can really, truly have these conversations. So that's the first thing. I had 3 things. The second thing is, white folks, when you start feeling guilty, because that's a natural reaction, that's a natural emotion you're going to feel. Guilt is actually a trap. Guilt is self-centered energy that you are feeling inward on yourself. And that's a lot of the problem when it comes to white people doing race work, is that we then make it about us, which is the whole problem. So when you feel guilty, give yourself permission to say, wow, I'm feeling guilty right now, but then give yourself permission to set that guilt down. Forgive yourself, okay? You're not gonna win this battle on your own. It's not yours to win on your own. So let go of your guilt, forgive yourself. you are going to screw up. I can't tell you how many times I have put my foot in. Carry around these little pen knives. We don't even know we're doing, and we just slice people up. And we hurt people deeply, terribly, without even realizing it. And when you do that, because you're still going to do it, I'm 6 years into my race journey and I'm still hurting people with my white bias. But when you do that, you have to own it and say, I really screwed up. This is my white bias coming through, and then work on yourself with doing better next time, because there's always going to be a next time. So keep looking forward instead of getting stuck in the past and in your own mistakes.
Wow, powerful, powerful words. Wow, it's really, really good. Kevin, you have 30 seconds.
It's gonna be pretty tough. I'm so sorry. A couple things. All right, one or two things to say. I do want to end with a quote from the Reverend Hales from earlier. In my classroom, I tried to tell the kids, in order to listen, you must hear. In order to listen, you must hear. When I was hearing some of your panelists from before, Reverend Brantley said, quote, we had segregated proms in 1998. She wasn't even allowed to go to the ice skating rink. Miss Apollo says it wasn't until she was in the USA that she felt different. Miss Fulton says that she researches if Black people can visit places on vacation, and she says to break down barriers and walk the walk and talk the talk. I was watching one of the processions going on in New York City a couple of nights ago, in the protests, and my daughter asked me, "Is that a parade, Daddy? Why are there so many lights?" She thought it was a parade, and I asked her, "Emily, how much choice did you have in your skin color?" And she says, "None." And I said, "How much choice did our dog Charlie have in her fur color, black and white spots, and brown and white spots?" And she said, "None." And I said, "And we're all the same." The idea was that we need to talk to our kids. We need to listen. My daughter is pretty bright for being 6 years old, realizing like she had no choice in her skin color, but we're all the same. And I think that's something that we need to preach to our young ones early on. And I wanted to end with an appeal to the African American community to guide us. Help us write the narrative. Help us write that solidarity. Mayor Hollingsworth made a comment mentioning that it's not for her or other African Americans to really like we need to do our education. And I appeal that there are so many people, white people, other whatever, who are really trying to kind of grasp this and come to terms and really want to move this along, showing solidarity. We need your help. And I think that that's something, it's okay to ask for help, I think, and I plead for it. To end with, I know I'm over my time, but I wanted to end with Reverend Hales, one of his quotes. Augustine said that hope has two beautiful daughters, anger and courage. Anger about the way things are, and the courage to make sure that they don't remain as they are. And that is what we are seeing today. And I think that it's really important to understand, like if you're a part of the allies or whatever the term is for the white community or anybody else, like things are starting to move, and we'll keep the momentum going, sure, but people are also starting to witness that. And so just keep listening, keep being educated, and keep hearing, and keep staying on the same course.
Thanks a lot, Kevin. Madeline.
30 seconds. Okay. When people say stop, drop, and roll when you're on fire, well, I think humanity is on fire, and we need to stop, listen, and learn. And I feel like there's a lot of ego. And we have to put the ego away. I went through a transition where I was really beating on myself, and now I'm here, and I value the anti-racist term. I am, and I will promise to be an anti-racist. I want to be on the right side of history. I don't want to be on the wrong side. As my dear friend Kristen says, let's be part of the solution, not the problem. I want people accountable. I want people to continue to use social media and exploit whatever they need to do. And I also want to celebrate small victories. Like you said, Zachary, I didn't know all that in your community, and I would love to know, what has happened because of this. So I'm just choked up. I'm just so happy and honored to be part of this. And I'm just proud of all of us right now for being so vulnerable.
Absolutely. And thanks to all of you all. Just want to announce that the conversation's not over. Next week, we're actually going to start working on our community action plans. And I invite our panelists from this week, last week, folks that have attended. We're going to maybe try to figure out some sort of way. I'll have a big whiteboard, get everyone in, hear comments, and let's begin to figure out how we can make changes happen within our communities, and what can we do right now, even with the pandemic, socially distanced. Let's work on our hearts, and maybe that's why we're socially distanced, for us to work on ourselves before we enter into society whenever we're blessed to go about a new normal. I want to just end this session with a poem that many may have heard before. It's very short, by German Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller. It's called First They Came. It reads, "First they came for the communist, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew." And I'm going to add, then they came for the Black community, and I did not speak out because I was not Black. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. So I will be posting, you'll be seeing advertisements for next week. Please keep the dialogue going. We'll have the recording of today's session, both, I guess we'll call it 2A and then 2B from our issue with technology, putting it together, but it'll be up there and it'll be available as a resource. I will also be highlighting Madeline's awesome book that she has. It's an awesome, awesome book. Remind me the name. It's
Positive Me, A Kid's Guide to Self-Compassion. And I have one book, not multiple books, but it won multiple awards.
Oh, yes, absolutely. But, you know, I might have a little bit of a prophetic thing going. I think you may have another book that you can help maybe in this space, and we need it. We really need children's books. All of the folks with parents, I mean, everybody has parents, but all the folks with children, raise your hand if you would like some really good children's books to navigate this space. Madeline, you've got, oh, she just ran. Oh, yeah, there it is. Absolutely. Yeah, please, 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 Madeline, we need like more literature for our young ones to be able to make a better generation. Thanks to everyone for coming out. Thank you so much. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to everyone who's continuing this dialogue. Thank you. I appreciate you so much. That's it. And in the words of Jerry Springer, take care of yourself and each other. Thank you. Thank you, Kara. I love you, bud.